We produce 1% of the CO2 in the atmosphere. China produces 27. And so while China is opening God knows how many coal-fired power stations and other such this stuff, the emissions that a small place like the United Kingdom is kicking out won't make the slightest scrap of difference. Also, without the oil and the gas, let's go down to transport. At the moment, the technology is only there for the electric cars with huge batteries, and you don't see any of the less well-off people driving these because they can't afford to do. So this transport, it's only available to reasonably well-off people. So if you got rid of all the oil, the people lower down the financial scale just wouldn't be able to afford the transport. And I just don't think that net zero is possible. It's a nice idea, but it just is not possible at the moment.
So I would say that the climate crisis is very much real. It's very much in play all over the world. We see incredible swings in weather patterns in the UK. We see places like Canada on fire. We see droughts, we see famine across the world, and these things are only going to get worse. It's not something that we can just keep drilling for oil and gas and then just hope that one day we can just switch over to renewables and everything's going to be all right. We need to start working towards net zero now as quickly as possible. I do agree that this should not come at the detriment of working people. We shouldn't be the ones that have to shoulder the cost of net zero, because the people that have truly benefited and made off like bandits from the fossil fuel industry are the corporations, are multimillionaires and billionaires, and they should be shouldering some of the cost. Just indulge one proverb, which is that all societies grow great when people plant trees in whose shade they will never sit. And we need to secure a future for young people, for children, grandchildren, because we could benefit now from oil and gas, we can live good lives, but eventually we are going to have to move to renewables for the benefit of humanity and for the people that are going to come after us. The Greens won't have any new oil or gas licences. We'll end subsidies to the oil and gas companies, and we will cancel recently issued licences such as for Rosebank. A carbon tax will be put onto fossil fuels based on emissions. So the greater the emissions when these fossil fuels are burned, the higher the tax that will be paid. Wind, we want to provide 70% of the UK electricity by 2030, with that continually ramping up with the use of offshore, onshore wind and solar, and a commitment that the energy sector will come under local democratic control. We can't allow our renewable energy sector to fall into private hands, because as soon as you bring the profit motive into something as precious as energy, it will never work for the people. It will only work for profit, and that's that.
Thank you. I found it profoundly depressing to listen to all the answers that's come from all the other members here. A combination of ignorance and sort of fantasy, from the sort of right from Andy through to Margaret's set of wishes, none of which are substantiated. What would Great British Energy do? Is there any understanding within the Labour Party of our energy system, just how huge, how complex it is, how immense the capital requirements are? So 6 billion or whatever it is they've said, which is a very large sum of money they want to put into Great British Energy, it's probably about 2 wind farms. I mean, I don't think they had any concept of the whole size and challenge here. Going to the question, should we stop new oil and gas licences? Oil and gas from the North Sea, the UK North Sea, is falling fast. It's declining at roughly about 9% a year, faster than our demand is falling. And it's worth saying, which you wouldn't know to listen to any of the answers you've had so far. The UK is the world leader. Among any major economy in the world, we cut our emissions by more than any other major economy on the planet. We can be really proud of that because, to go back, Andy saying, oh, it's, you know, we can do it but not yet. Let me be good but not yet. The science is stark. We do need to act. And the UK is acting. Under the Conservatives, we have acted. In 2010, less than 7% of our electricity, less than 7, came from renewables. Today it's pushing towards 50. When Labour left power, only 12% of homes were properly insulated, EPCC or above. Now it's above 50%. We have brought about a transformation, but we've kept the lights on. We haven't bankrupted the country. And Rishi Sunak is absolutely right to emphasise that we've got to do this in a practical way. And if we get it right, especially in this area, we can benefit economically as well. But when you allow this kind of soundbite fantasy nonsense, which we had pretty much from everybody else on this panel to come out, it puts us in danger. So in answer to your question on oil and gas licences, absolutely not would I seek to do. Because the oil and gas production, I find it, and it's true, the IEA, the Climate Change Committee, lots of other people, I was the minister responsible, I tried to look at it from first principles, suggesting that, you know, it's the oil and gas companies, it's the Greens, of course, love it, big corporations, let's attack them. They're not the problem. Oil and gas exploration and production is not what tips us over the edge. It's the fact that Linda's car still burns oil and gas. That's the problem. Until we have changed our cars, our buildings, and our factories, oil and gas is going to be produced. Now, it can either be produced here with tens of thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs, tens of billions of tax, and really high standards, or we can import it from abroad. It will, if we cease to have oil and gas licenses issued in this country, it will make not one drop of difference to how much petrol Linda puts in her car. Not one drop. All it will do is mean we bring in imports, so we lose the hundreds of thousands of jobs, we lose the tens of billions of tax, and do you know what's most ironic and ridiculous? We would bring in imports with higher embedded emissions than what is we produce here because we have very high standards. They said they want to cancel Rosebank. Rosebank has 12 kilograms per barrel of CO2 in production pre-electrification. The global average is 16 or 17, offshore probably 20. It's one of the cleanest ways of getting oil and gas that we've got, and it can happen here with British jobs and is greener. But because of this desperate desire to send signals rather than look at the actual science and look at the facts, it's completely wrong-headed and so ironic. You lose the jobs, you damage energy security, and most ironic of all, you put up emissions. Well done. Maybe you make yourself feel good. You don't actually help the planet. And we need to do it in a practical way because this country is leading the world. This Conservative government has led the world. We do it in a way that keeps the lights on, that is good for the economy as well, and that is the way we'll get the rest of the world to follow. Because have no doubt, again, whenever we have these conversations, everyone talks as if the UK, we are. The one thing that Andy said that was correct is we're less than 1% of emissions. Now, it's not that doesn't matter, because 40% of global emissions come from people who produce less than 1% of emissions. You can imagine, it's like, we all have a part to play. But we've got to get the rest of the world to follow, and that's when I was responsible for the negotiations, which I was at the last COP in Dubai. That's what we did. We had the most ambitious and progressive agreement ever to move to phase out fossil fuels. But don't fetishise attacking oil and gas production. It's really not the problem. It's the consumption that's the problem, and that's why we've moved. That's why we've transformed the insulation of homes, as I say, from fewer than 1 in 6 homes properly insulated when Labour left power to 50% today. So much more to do, but we've done an awful lot. And if you care about the environment, there's only one party you can vote for, and that's the Conservatives.
Thank you for that too. Who had Linda's car down on the bingo card this evening for a mention? 2 mentions for Linda's car tonight. The next question was going to be from Petra Carter. Is Petra here? If you don't mind, Petra, it largely been answered. The question was, how will you improve the present housing stock to make it more energy efficient? And I think it was generally covered by most of the speakers. So we'll move on to the next one. It's an education question. We'll take this question and we'll have a comfort break. So an education question from Karen Davenport. Is Karen here? Karen's not here, so I'll be Karen. Right. The East Riding has the lowest funding for children with special needs in the country. SEN schools are in deficit budgets due to funding that has not changed for 10 years. What do you propose to do to ensure SEN receive adequate funding and children's needs are being met lawfully? And we'll start with Margaret.
Okay. Yes. Well, first of all, it's shocking that these parents and children are subject to a postcode lottery. And there are huge problems with the system. Gillian Keegan, the Conservatives Education Secretary, she admitted the SEN system is lose, lose, lose. It's costing a fortune and not providing the right service. And they've had 14 years to fix this. I have a good friend, I was on the Jo Cox Women in Leadership programme, it was the anniversary of Jo's death recently. She's standing in Herne and Sandwich, she's autistic, which is very admirable that she's standing in politics, and she has an autistic son. It's taken her 2 years to get a placement for him. I'm quoting a local parent looking for help. The lack of support was frightening. We were passed from pillar to post. It seemed nobody wanted to help us. And I do want to pay tribute to the mums. The group in Withensea set up the Lookout project. They were struggling to find the help locally, and I'm aware of that project, and it's really terrific, so credit to them. So the challenge is that over 570,000 children have an education, health and care plan in England. So that's 1 in 19 between the ages of 5 and 15. So that's a record high. But services for these kind of children, the disabled children, have been cut over 14 years, even as demand for support has grown. So the rise in caseloads, now they place a huge cost on councils. And of course we know it's come up, government funding to local councils has been cut and cut. So this is creating real problems for the councils that have to deliver this. So we've got parents of disabled children forcing to fight against councils to try and get support for their children's education. Okay, so what will Labour do? Well, we will take a community-wide approach. Improving inclusivity, we need that. Expertise in mainstream schools, that's important because some children need to be in mainstream education but dealt with their needs met there. But some also need special schools to cater those with very complex needs. And we'll make sure that such admissions decisions account for the needs of communities, requiring schools to cooperate with their local authority admissions, send inclusion and place planning. So it's a holistic approach to this. And before Graham Stewart says it, we're aware that there are some independent schools that cater towards SEN pupils, and Labour has already said that any pupil with an education, health and care plan that goes to a private school would not be subject to Labour's plan to put VAT on private schools, and the local authority wouldn't be paying a higher cost. I just want to head that one off at the pass. So yes, it is a huge problem, and it's a very complex one because it's a result of shortage of funding to local authorities, but it needs a holistic plan to address.
George?
Very difficult to disagree with anything that Margaret's saying. It's quite clear that there's a massive funding shortfall as far as education generally is concerned. But I do want to reflect on something that Graham said when he said we haven't bankrupted our economy. Let me just put this to you. Last year, our government, Graham's government, paid £100 billion in interest on the national debt in this country. Now that is more than we spend on schools. It's more than we spend on defence. It's more than we spend on schools and defence put together. And he says they haven't bankrupted the country. The country is up to its neck in debt. As far as Yorkshire's concerned, and as far as SEND is concerned, it's quite clear that early intervention is absolutely key to dealing with SEND kids and supporting SEND kids' parents. Early diagnosis is really important, and when a parent thinks that one of their kids is suffering from autism or some other mental health complaint, they should be able to get early support at the earliest possible time. And again, Graham, you've been in for the last 19 years, but as the questioner says, we are the 4th worst funded area in the country, which is awful, which is sad. And it is really tragic. I pay tribute to the people in Williamsey, and I pay tribute to everybody, the people that are working at the new centre in Welton and the new centre in Bridlington. None of them are anywhere near Beverley and Holderness. And we need that sort of support on our doorstep. Imagine if we could start filling that funding gap. That £14 billion, as I say, that we don't get every year from central government. Imagine what we could do with that in supporting people. This issue, SEND and wider educational issues, goes to the very heart of why Yorkshire is being shortchanged. And if we could resolve that issue, we could take massive steps forward. And it wouldn't just benefit them, because it would benefit the whole community. It would benefit them, and it would benefit everybody's future.
Jonathan?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, kids.
Jonathan,
Right.
I'd say I would echo the two people that have just come before. I think it goes without saying that if you have a child, and if you are a child with special education needs or a disability, you should have exactly the same access to a high quality education that any other child would get. Just because you have special education needs or a disability, it shouldn't ever disqualify you from a high quality education that so many other pupils around the country can have. So with that being said, the Green Party, we would make sure that we invest in special education need and disability provision within mainstream schools to allow mainstream schools to be able to cope with children that have SEND needs. All schools should have and will have fully accessible buildings and specially trained teachers who are able to deal with these pupils in the best way possible. And local councils have the funds to properly support SEND students at school and in getting to school. So it's not just a case of when they arrive at the door, they have what they need, they're able to get to and from school without any issues as well.
Right, John, you're on.
At ADF, we're quite a new party and we haven't investigated every issue yet, so this would be on our list. But we do have quite definite ideas about how we're going to fund everything. So this will include, we'll completely get rid of overseas aid, which is 1.7% of GDP, and in recent years has been higher than £14 billion, and it all goes unaudited to overseas countries. We're not saying we're not helping overseas countries. We'll send the teams out to help. You know, if there's an earthquake, whatever, we'll send our teams out to help them, but we won't be sending money that often gets misappropriated, and the leaders are buying nice villas like Zelensky. He's got villas on the Baltic Sea. So we'll stop money. Yeah, that's true. We'll also stop money going to places like Ukraine. It's nothing to do with us. It's more to do with the politicians than it is the English people. And also Israel. We're not just a cool couple of billion here and a couple of billion there. It'll all be stopped. And we're also going to stop funding in hotels, illegal immigrants coming in. They're not staying in 4-star accommodation anymore and getting fed and money to live their lives. And the man, do you know who the man was that sorted that out from? It was our very own Keir Starmer when he was a barrister. He won those rights for people, you know, for illegal immigrants to get more than our own citizens. You know, and it's all completely wrong.
Nothing about
It's all
child
corrupt.
disability, so you may as well stop answering the question now.
No, we can use our 2 minutes to say what we want, whether you want to hear it or not.
Question about children in need. Thank you.
Linda.
Thank you. I'll try and answer the question about SEND, which is what was asked. The requirements for SEND, special educational needs and disabilities, are included in government guidance which was published in 2014. So it's a bit shameful that some of the most vulnerable members of our society aren't being looked after as stipulated in that guidance. And it's all down to a funding deficit, really. So we've mentioned that SEND in the East Riding is the least funded in the country, but we're also the 4th worst funded for education overall. I mean, it's just absolutely shocking, and it's a real credit to our teachers, whether they're teaching special educational needs and disabilities children, or children at mainstream schools, or children who don't live with SEND. To achieve what they do achieve, I think they've done an amazing job. What will we do for SEND? Well, we will establish a new national body and we will give the authorities the funding that they need for the high needs block to reduce the amount that schools themselves have to pay towards EHCPs. The whole system is really complicated and the guidance is yay thick, and if you go into most special schools or into the departments in the East Riding who look after our SEND kids, then they have these books on their desk to make sure that they are compliant with it. But the whole reason why they're not compliant is mainly because of lack of funding. We will give local education authorities like the East Riding the power and resources to act as strategic education authorities, because at the moment they don't have overall responsibility for SEND, they just provide the funding. They will also be able to determine places planning, so they can look at our buildings and decide how they're best to be used. Might not necessarily mean that we need to build new provision. It could be that we could be using older provision, but we spend some of the money that the Liberal Democrats will be giving to improving our school buildings for that specific purpose. That Strategic Education Authority power would also include in-year omissions and exclusions. But if you think about it, appropriate funding benefits not only the child, not only the teachers, but also the carers. And I constantly have a stream of people contacting me about SEND because they know I have experience in this arena. I have many friends with SEND kids. I grew up with a cousin who had Down syndrome, and it is really shocking that we don't have adequate provision countrywide for our SEND kids. As I said, the Tories have had 10 years to sort it out. What have they been doing? We will sort it out.
Graham.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, I mean, in the answer to the question about the lower funding here, it's also based on some technical issue in the past as to where the money was put in the East Riding accounts. I met with Victoria Aitken, who's absolutely passionate on this subject. She's the cabinet member for the East Riding who leads on education, and she is an absolute national expert on the whole issue of special educational needs and disability funding. We attended a meeting of the F40 group, which brings together local authorities around the country that tend to have lost out from the formula. People normally, they're interested in the overall quantum and they're not very interested in the distribution. And distribution can be grossly unfair in a whole series of areas, from health to education, indeed policing. So it is an area of interest to me to keep working with Victoria, and as others have said, I would pay tribute to the phenomenal effort of so many schools with special units within them, and the efforts to take this issue seriously and provide a great outcome, because the outcomes are overall good. There's always, though, a tension between, I remember it would have been 10 years ago when I chaired the Education Committee and the government was reviewing this last time. They brought in they got rid of statements, if you remember those, and they brought in the education and healthcare plans. Because of the rise in demand, not least from autism and in the population, what we've seen is it just always having this demand that is so much greater than the funding. So it's trying to make it go as far as possible while also delivering for children. So it's a tough one, and it's easy for Linda, who knows the Liberal Democrats are likely to be very far from government, to promise more money for, so far as I can see, every single topic that's come up. You are always having to balance and get this right. So it is a lot of it. We in this area have been relatively lowly funded for all sorts of things, and yet can deliver great outcomes. That doesn't mean that it's fair. That's why I'm always supported the F40 group. But it's important to say what actually happens to children in the end, rather than just obsessing about the money. But I also focus on that as well. Good news is that the government has said that there's going to be a new special free school is going to be developed and supported in the East Riding, and there's also going to be an alternative provision school opening in Beverley. So those things are coming up as well. But it's a constant battle to get fair funding as well as the overall quantum, because You get absurd anomalies in the system going outside of education, Angus, and when I do that, I remember from probably 15 years ago finding that the part of Dorset, which had like the oldest population in the country, had about £4,000 to spend on each cancer patient, whereas Tower Hamlets, which might have had lots of challenges in its population but was very young, had about 14,000, because it doesn't matter what your lifestyle's like. If you're young, you tend not to have cancer, and if you're old, however healthy you are, you do. And you've got all these anomalies in the funding system. So it's an area of interest for me to try and push ministers to change, because whoever's in government, they tend to give sort of 2.5% to everybody, and then you point out that just grows the cash gap between the people who are lower funded and the people who are higher funded, and trying to get people to take that seriously and worry about distribution as well as the quantum when it is tediously complicated. But it actually makes a real difference to the ability to deliver for children like those with special educational needs, so it's work that needs to continue.
Andrew?
Well, I'll never claim to be an expert on special educational needs. However, I do agree that from both ends of the table, I do agree with what we've heard from there. And there's a little more that I can add to that, because it would just be going over what they've already said. That said, I think with every local authority, there needs to be some investigation done. Every chief executive and below them needs to be accountable for where the money goes to. And I think whichever government is in power, they'll say, well, we've sent X amount of pounds to this local authority, but does anybody actually know where it goes? And I'm sure there's a lot of waste that can be got rid of and put towards these necessary causes, like special educational needs. Beyond that, I can't give any more insight. I don't have a silver bullet to fire away, and I think that's all I can tell you on that one.
Okay, thank you. We'll have the comfort break now. It's 8:15. For the benefit of the panel, there is another education question which is fairly similar to the one that's just been asked. It's a bit of a wider question about education funding for schools, but I think it has been generally covered. So I think candidates, if we can just pass over that question, we'll move on to